Welcome to this exam warm-up for Edexcel GCSE Business Paper 2. In this session, we're going to look at some of the key areas to think about for Paper 2, including the structure and some practice questions. So let's start with some true or false questions. Statement in front of you. Decisions are made at a local level in a centralised organisation. Do you think that statement is true or false? Do you think it's true or false? Decisions are made at a local level in a centralised organisation. True or false? Of course, if you need more time here, you can pause the recording and come back to it when you've had an opportunity to think. Decisions are made at a local level in a centralised organisation. Let's look at the answer. It is, of course, false. Decisions are made at a local level in a decentralised organisation, but in a centralised organisation, they're going to be made at the top of the hierarchy by the senior staff in the organisation. So that was false. Well done if you got that right. Question 2 in our true or false. Procurement involves choosing suppliers, negotiating contracts, and deciding on the terms of payment. Does procurement involve choosing suppliers, negotiating contracts, and deciding on the terms of payment? If you think that's true, say true. If you think it's false, go for false. I'll reveal the answer in a few seconds. This statement is, of course, true. That's exactly what procurement is. It's about selecting suppliers, negotiating contracts with those suppliers, and agreeing terms of payment with those suppliers. Final one of our true or false. Public limited company is owned and operated by the government. Public limited company is owned and operated by the government. Is that true or false? Read carefully. Public limited company owned and operated by the government. Is that true or false? Here comes the answer. Remember, you can pause if you need more time. The answer here is false. Public limited companies, despite the name, public limited companies are private sector organisations. Public limited companies are private sector organisations. They are not owned and operated by the government. They're owned and operated by private individuals. Really well done if you got that right. Here's our overview of Paper 2 then. Paper 2, of course, only assesses Theme 2. Theme 2 is building a business. As with Paper 1, though, it's a written exam. It's 1 hour and 45 minutes long. It's 90 marks in total, and it's worth 50% of the overall GCSE. As with Paper 1, it's broken down into 3 sections. Section A is worth 35 marks, and there's no case study with Section A. Section B and C, there is context. Section B is worth 30 marks, Section C 25. And Sections B and C will have separate case studies. The 2 case studies will relate to national or global businesses because Paper 2 is about building a business. Remember that the case studies will appear in a source booklet, so a separate booklet to the one in which you'll answer the exam questions. Case studies are in a source booklet. And just be aware that the contexts may link to service businesses as well as businesses that produce tangible products. And of course, the customers may be other businesses. It may be a business that sells to other businesses. Just be aware of that. So Theme 2 content, remember there are 5 subsections to Theme 2. We've got growing the business, making marketing decisions, making operational decisions, making financial decisions, and making human resource decisions. So Theme 2 focuses on key business concepts, issues and decisions used to grow a business. And the focus is on different functional areas. So operations, marketing, finance, and human resources. Also considers the impact of the wider world on the decisions a business makes as it grows. Paper 2, all about Theme 2. And as we talked about before, the structure of Paper 2 3 sections, Section A, Section B, Section C. Section A, there's no business context. You're going to get a selection of different questions in Section A, 3 multiple choice questions worth a mark each, 2 more multiple choice questions worth 2 marks each, a couple of calculate questions, they're always worth 2 marks, 6 3-mark explain questions, and then Section A will finish with a discuss question worth 6 marks. So similar format to paper 1. That's Section A, there's no context. Section B, you get your first case study. Remember, that's in the source booklet. And all of your answers in Section B have to relate to that context. Again, selection of different questions. There is one 1-mark state question. There are 2 outline questions that are worth 2 marks each. There are 2 more calculate questions. Remember, they're always worth 2 marks. 2 6-mark analyze questions. We'll look at those in a bit more detail later on, as well as 1 9-mark justify question. That's Section B. Section C, separate context, also in the source booklet. And in Section C, every answer except question 1 has to relate to the context. Question 1 here in red is a give question. It's worth a mark. There's no context required. Okay, so that's the only one in sections B and C where there's no context required. Other questions in section C, we've got 1-mark identify question. We've got a 2-mark outline question, another justify question, and we finish with the 12-mark evaluate question. So a total of 90 marks overall across the 3 sections. 35 marks section A, 30 on section B, and 25 on section C. Here are some 2-statement multiple choice questions. 2-statement multiple choice questions. Statement number 1, an increase in productivity will lead to an increase in unit costs. Statement number 2, productivity is the total number of products a business makes. If you think that both of those statements are true, go for option A. If you think that the first one's true but the second one isn't, go for B. If you think that the first one is false but the second one is true, go for C. And if you think that both statement 1 and statement 2 are false, go for D. If you need some more time, remember you can pause the recording. So the answer to this 2-statement multiple choice question is D. Both statements are false. An increase in productivity will lead to a decrease in unit costs. So statement 1 is false. Statement 2, productivity is the total number of products a business makes. No, it isn't. Output is the total number of products a business makes. Productivity is the output, for example, per worker. So productivity is how much an individual worker on average produces. But it's not true either. So both statements are false. Second of our 2-statement MCQs here. Statement 1, minimizing costs is one part of the sales process. Statement number 2, flow production lines are highly automated. Do we think that both are true, in which case we'll go for A. If we think that statement 1's true, but not statement 2, we'll go for B. If we think that statement 1 isn't true, but statement 2 is, we'll go for C. And if we think they're both false, it's D. A few more seconds if you're still working. Minimizing costs, one part of the sales process, and flow production lines are highly automated. Well, I'll reveal the answer, which is C. Statement 1's false. Minimizing costs is not part of the sales process. The sales process is the process from initial inquiries through to after-sales service, but it doesn't include minimizing costs. But flow production lines are highly automated. So statement 2 was true. And well done if you got that right. Final one of our 2-statement MCQs. We've got fringe benefits as an example of a financial method of motivation. And secondly, feelings of isolation from co-workers is an advantage to a business of remote working. as before. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Go for A, B, C or D, depending on whether you think statement 1, statement 2 are true or false. So fringe benefits, are they a financial method of motivation? And is a feeling of isolation from co-workers an advantage of remote working? I will reveal the answer. This time it's B. Statement 1 is true. Fringe benefits are indeed a financial method of motivation. Company cars, mobile phones, those sorts of things are fringe benefits. They are a financial method of motivation. They have a financial value. But feelings of isolation from co-workers is not an advantage of remote working. That's false. It's a disadvantage of remote working for businesses. So statement 2 is false. And let's just recap multiple choice questions. We know we're going to get 3 1-mark MCQs, and then there are 2 that are worth 2 marks each. So 7 marks in total. All of these are in section A. Multiple choice questions are only assessing knowledge, and the best way to prepare for them is to revise all of the content in theme 2 using the specification and learn all the formulae. And if you do that, then you should be able to answer all of the MCQs accurately. In previous series, questions have tended to ask which of the following is an example or which of the following are examples of. So be familiar with the format of the question itself. And remember that multiple choice questions are computer marked. So you need to follow the instructions very carefully on how to select an answer and indeed what to do if you change your mind. Because they're computer marked, you need to make sure it's very clear which answer you've selected. So follow the instructions to the letter. Make sure you choose the appropriate number of options. If it's a 1-mark MCQ, it's 1 choice. If it's a 2-mark MCQ, then it's 2 choices. And never leave them blank. Always guess if you're unsure. Hopefully you can work it down to maybe a 50-50 by getting rid of a couple of answers you know aren't possible, but always make sure you answer them. Don't leave them blank. If you leave them blank, you will definitely get 0. Let's look at the explain questions then, because they're such a key part of section A. Remember, you're going to get 6 of these. So 6 3-mark questions. That's 18 of the 35 marks in section A on these types of questions. And what they're looking for is 1 relevant point. Remember, the question is going to be explain 1. So it's 1 relevant point. You're then looking for 1 strand of development followed by a 2nd strand of development. And we'll look at some examples in just a second. But it's 1 relevant point. You're not going to get a 2nd mark for a 2nd relevant point and so on. It's 1 mark for that. The other 2 marks come from the strands of development. You must show a very distinct, clear understanding of the topic area in the question in your response. That's vital. In other words, that first point has to be relevant. Has to be relevant, has to be precise. Let's look at some examples. Your turn to be the examiner. Here is a 3-mark explain question. So we've got 1 drawback to a business, explain 1 drawback to a business of using flow production, always worth 3 marks. 1 drawback to a business of using flow production, and here is an answer. So 1 drawback to a business of using flow production is that it is expensive. This means cost will rise, and as a result, profits will be lowered. How many marks would you award that response? The question, 1 drawback to a business of using flow production. Would you give it 0? Would you give it 1? Would you give it 2? Or would you give it 3? Have a think, decide. Would you give it 0, 1, 2 or 3? 1 drawback to a business of using flow production is that it is expensive. This means costs will rise and as a result profits will be lowered. Well, I'll reveal the answer. The number of marks awarded for this is 0. And it's because it's not precise enough. There's not a distinct understanding shown of flow production. Expensive would be relevant, but it's not precise enough. expensive could relate to batch production. Batch production, for example, could be more expensive than job production. Job production itself could be expensive if we were looking at cost per unit. So it's too ambiguous. It needs to be more precise. The strands that follow are also vague. So the key thing for you here is to be precise and show specific understanding, in this case of flow production. This was worth 0 marks. Here's another explain question. This time it's one method a business could use to distribute its products. And here's a good way of answering that question. One method is through a retailer. The retailer would sell the business's products direct to customers in stores under the retailer's own brand name. Well, relevant point, one method is through a retailer. The retailer would sell the business's products direct to customers. There's a strand based on our original point, and we've got a second interconnected strand with in stores under the retailer's own brand name. Relatively short, relatively concise, does exactly what it needs to, and it gets 3 out of 3. Just remember, in a question that asks for one method, you must explain how the business achieves something or how it does something rather than why. So it's not why a retailer is beneficial here. The strands aren't related to that. The strands are related to how a retailer would help a business distribute its products. So don't drift into pros and cons. Stick to the question. The method questions are often the ones that students find hardest. So one method is through a retailer. Then we're looking at how it does it rather than why. Be very careful with the reading of questions here. Remember the quantitative skills in paper 2, 10% of the marks overall on paper 2, as with paper 1, are based on quantitative skills. Quantitative skills doesn't just mean calculations, but there are a number of calculations you could be asked to do. We've got percentages and percentage changes. We've got averages, revenue, cost and profit, gross profit margin and net profit margin as ratios, and average rate of return. Any of those could be calculations. And then we've got interpretation of figures. So interpretation of figures, we've got information from graphs and charts, interpreting profitability ratios, that's gross profit margin and net profit margin, interpreting financial data, profit and loss accounts, average rate of return, and also being able to interpret marketing data, like market research data, as well as things like market share, changes in costs, and changes in price. Any of those could be tested in paper 2. So be comfortable and familiar with all of those quantitative skills. And just a recap here on calculation questions. We said 10% of the qualification, so 9 marks in total, 9 out of 90. There are 4 calculate questions that are worth 2 marks each, and then there's the 1 identify question in section C, so that makes 9. Make sure you learn the formulae, and we posted a link to a formula list in the paper 1 warm-up, so make sure you're familiar with all of those formulae. Sounds obvious, but make sure you read each question carefully. Make sure you check if 2 decimal places are required. There shouldn't be any rounding required if you're asked to give it to 2 decimal places. You should just be able to read off the numbers from the calculator after the decimal point. Make sure you show your workings. Please show your process. That way, even if you get the final answer wrong, you may be able to get some credit. If there are no workings and the answer's wrong, then you'll definitely get 0. Make sure you're working in the correct values. And finally there, in red, write your answer on the line. The line in the answer booklet, that's where you're going to write your answer. Key things with calculation questions. Here is some context. We've got item A, which is looking at Lush. Lush Cosmetics is a business that specialises in making and selling products for the skin, face, hair and body. Acting ethically is very important to Lush, as it prides itself on providing customers with beauty products that respect the environment, do not harm animals, and contain natural ingredients. A growing number of its products are vegan. However, all are vegetarian and are made fresh by hand. Despite operating in a highly competitive market, Lush is able to charge high prices for its products. The business is currently experiencing increasing sales. So we've got some context, and we'll look now at 6-mark analyse questions, which of course in section B are going to relate to context. In this case it's Lush. In the examination it will be the first of the case studies in the source booklet. 6-mark analyse questions. You're looking for 1 or 2 relevant points in total. So get away from the shopping list idea. It's two points maximum. Okay, we don't need a third or a fourth or a fifth. It's 2 maximum. And then what we're looking for, and this is key now for every question, 6 marks and above, 5 interconnected strands of analysis. That could be across 1 point or split between the 2 points. Try and use connectives to build those interconnected strands, and we'll look at some examples in a moment. Remember, because we're in section B now, we must have context. The analyse questions require context throughout the answer. If you're going to make 2 points, you're going to have 2 paragraphs. We're looking for 3 or more distinct references to the case study. Okay, not the same term, not the same bit of application each time, but 3+ references across those 2 paragraphs. Remember, of course, you don't need any balance in your 6-mark analyse questions. It could be a question that asks to analyse the impact, so you could be looking at positive or negative or a combination, but there is no requirement for balance. Key point to remember. And the 9-mark questions, 2 9-mark questions, always start with justify. And then one of these is going to be in section B and one in section C. They're always presented as 2 bullets, and you're going to choose one option to focus on. So in this case, we've got, in order to increase its market share, Gousto is considering 2 options. Option 1, offer a price discount for new customers that subscribe to the service. Option 2, sell its recipe boxes in M&S food stores. The question itself, justify which one of these 2 options Gousto should choose. Well, from the outset, choose one option. It could be option 1 or option 2. There is no correct option. It's your choice. But choose one and effectively ignore the other one. So you cross through the other one. In this case, we're going to focus on option 1. So option 1 is what we're going to look at. We're looking for a 3-paragraph approach to 9-mark questions. We're looking for balance in our analytical paragraphs. 9 marks and above, we're going to need balance. So we're going to make sure as well that we include a detailed conclusion. The conclusion is the 3rd paragraph. It's going to answer the question set. We're going to try and bring in some new evidence here, so something else, another point. And we're going to look for a depends on factor as well. What might our decision to choose option 1 depend on? In other words, why might we go for option 2? The conclusion is really important. Remember, we're looking for balance with the 9-mark questions. The key command word here is justify. And we're looking for 2 analytical paragraphs. The first analytical paragraph is a positive point. It's a positive point or an advantage of the one option that we've selected. That positive point is analysed. We're looking for 2 or 3 strands at least in this paragraph, and we're looking for context. So the first paragraph, positive point, is the advantage of our chosen option. In this case, we went for option 1, didn't we? The second paragraph is a negative point. It's a disadvantage of the same option. It's a disadvantage of, in this case, option 1. So we've got an advantage in paragraph 1 and a disadvantage in paragraph 2. That is what gives us the balance. Our second paragraph, our negative point, our disadvantage, is also analysed. We're looking for 2 or 3 strands here, so 5 strands across our 2 paragraphs. Remember, we could do it in 1 paragraph, but we're looking for at least 5 interconnected strands across the 2 paragraphs, and we're looking for context in both of these paragraphs. That's key. 5 interconnected strands of analysis across the 2 paragraphs. And then, of course, we're going to have our conclusion, our 3rd paragraph, and the 3rd paragraph, we need application to context as well. So for the 9-mark questions, there's going to be application, there's going to be context in all 3 paragraphs. Reference to the case study in all 3 paragraphs. And that's really key. And that could be a useful way of justifying your decision to go for option 1 or option 2. Finish by looking at 12-mark questions, and then we'll recap some exam gold. 12-mark questions, there's one in the paper. It's in section C. It's the last question on the paper, and it always starts with evaluate. We're going to use that 3-paragraph structure again. We must have balance. So we're looking for one positive point analysed in context. So one positive point, the advantage, analysed in context, 2 to 3 strands, plus explicit use of the case study. Paragraph 2, a negative point, a disadvantage, also analysed in context. So we're looking for a total of 5 interconnected strands across our 2 analytical paragraphs. And that 3rd paragraph, as with the 9-marker, is a detailed conclusion. Same thing, we're looking to bring in new evidence and a depends on factor. The 12-mark question is a 3-paragraph approach. There are lots of similarities between that and the 9-mark question. Okay, so we're looking for paragraph, positive point, analysed in context, negative point, analysed in context, looking for 5 interconnected strands, looking for application context in all 3 paragraphs. Remember that, and hopefully you'll do really, really well. Here's some exam gold to finish off. Make sure you read the case studies carefully. They're going to be in a separate source booklet. But if the case study is based on a business you're not familiar with, use the extra time to read the context really carefully. The case is always going to give you clues to help you answer the questions in that section. Remember, there's a case study for section B and a case study for section C. So read them really carefully. Please make sure you attempt every question. We said that about the multiple choice questions, but it's true of every question. Attempt every question, manage your time, try not to leave anything out at all. Attempt every question. Learn the formulae, practice calculating things like averages, percentages and percentage changes. The calculations you're dealing with should be straightforward because the questions in the exam are only worth 2 marks. There's a relatively low value to them. So practice them and you should be able to perform in the paper 2 exam. Make sure you write your answers to calculate questions on the line, vitally important, and follow the structures for the 6, 9 and 12 mark questions. 6, 9 and 12 mark questions, but also be clear of the structure for outline and state questions. Outline and state questions require context. Okay, they require context. So check the structure for outline and state questions. Because they appear in sections B and C, they're going to require context. Don't overlook that. Just remember that there will be one give question at the start of section C. It's only worth 1 mark, but it will assess knowledge only. So it's the only question in section B or section C that doesn't require context. Well, that brings us to the end of this paper 2 exam warm-up. It only remains for me to wish you the very best of luck for the paper 2 exam.